You are listening to the F11 Photography Podcast.
To the chasers of light, to the purveyors of pictures, to all of you listening around the world, this is the F11 Photography Podcast. I am your host, Kevin Deal, along with your other host, Mr. Brandon Gorrie.
Yeah, welcome to the best podcast in the world. Can we start saying that?
I think Joe Rogan might have something on us in terms of listenership and sponsorship and all that. But if you want to start going there, knock yourself out, my friend.
Welcome to the best photography podcast in the world. Broadcasting live, not live, out of Austin, Texas. It feels good to say live, but we're not live. You checking out some film? I was looking at film prices last night. I was like, I did my weekly or my monthly scour. I was just like, all right, let's check Cine Still for discounts. Let's check Midwest Photo for discounts, eBay and Amazon.
I'm actually having a bit of a possible, I don't want to say crisis. I think that's the worst word for that. But I'm having a possibly a crossroads that I'm going through. So I have a Epson V600 flatbed scanner that I use for scanning my negatives. And I don't like how long it takes. And when we had Andy Famine here the other day, and by the way, if you haven't checked out that interview, we would actually have him in here. We had him call into the F11 hotline, but we had Andy on the F11 hotline. He called in from Los Angeles, and he was telling me that he uses his Sony and his 100 millimeter macro to do film scanning. And of course, you know, you go down on those YouTube rabbit holes, and sure enough, I go on that YouTube rabbit hole and you can scan an entire roll of 120 film in 60 seconds if you just use a 100 millimeter macro lens. And so that got me onto I may be putting my Epson on Facebook Marketplace soon. What are we going to say?
I was going to say I know where this is going. And it's going in the direction of you're going to scan your 6x7s and your 120 format with your GFX.
I may.
And get a fucking 100 megabyte file for your film.
Possibly. Well, I've been looking. Negative Supply makes a kit it's not cheap. It's $699, but that's also, I could probably make most of that back by selling my flatbed scanner because a lot of people like flatbed scanners, the Epsons.
600 for I've got a V550 and I'd be lucky to get 90 for that thing.
Well, I make a chunk of it back, but I also think about time. It takes me about 30 to 45 minutes to scan 12 6x6 images. I took a whole roll of Hasselblad shots the other day, and so I had 4 rolls and it took me 2 hours. Whereas with this, it can take me 4 minutes. And so I think about how much time in my day. It's like, maybe I can get $200 from my scanner. Now all of a sudden it becomes a $499 investment instead of a $699 investment.
Not even that. My buddy here in Austin, he just grabbed a $20 LED. And then his tripod, and then just you got a used 105 mil from eBay, and like for about $150.
Well, I think that's what I'm contemplating right now. But we have a really awesome show today. We have an awesome guest from the United Kingdom calling into the F11 hotline, Chris Woodman. We'll get to that here in just a minute. But first, I want to talk about today's sponsor, and that is Gamut. LUTs, lookup tables. Some of you out there may find yourself in a situation where you're asked to do a job and you're a stills photographer and they're like, well, we want you to shoot video too. And you're like a little intimidated, like, man, I don't really shoot video because the color grading is such a pain and I don't really know what I'm doing. That is where Gamut steps in. Gamut is a company that makes LUTs. They make base LUTs for your camera. So if you're a Sony, Canon, pretty much everything but Fuji, unfortunately. Thankfully, I also shoot Canon, but even Blackmagic and DJI, they have base LUTs for your system that will make the colors pop. But they also make creative LUTs. And so they have a new product that's launching called Luxe for you wedding photographers out there. And this Luxe product is a very beautiful wedding LUT. But they also make cinema LUTs. So some of my favorite LUTs that I saw were Kinetic, Immersion, and Lotus. Those are their commercial LUTs. And I think that those look fantastic. And their LUTs are only about $95, which if you think about it, it's like, man, I've got this really complex project and I'm trying to get all my colors right. Would you spend $95 one time for all your future projects to have a really awesome starting point on the colors? Hopefully you're going to say yes to that, because especially if you're not a professional cinematographer, videographer, and you're just kind of dabbling in it like I do, hell yeah, I'm going to say yes to $95 to give me really good creative colors. But what's really awesome is if you check out the link in the description below, they are doing, for your first purchase, they're giving you 15% off the LUT. So the LUT will not be $95. It'll be 15% off $95. So check out the link in the description below to get 15% off your copy of your LUT from Gamut today. Our guest today is an award-winning photographer who primarily focuses on portraiture with a slant on fine art nudes. Joining us from Yeovil, Somerset, in the United Kingdom on the F11 hotline, give a warm welcome for Chris Woodman. How you doing, man?
Hi, Kevin. How are you doing? I'm good, cheers.
And how do you pronounce the name of your town? Did I say it right?
It's Yeovil.
Yeovil. I have to ask because, you know, I love you guys. I love the English, except for the fact that oftentimes they can't even pronounce their own language correctly. So like anything that ends in B-U-R-Y is brie. If I ask an Englishman to pronounce the word D-E-R-B-Y, they'll say Darby. And I'm like, there's no A in there. Y'all need to get your own language correct. I'm just saying.
Yeah. But our language is made up of other people's languages. That's why.
It's a bastardization. They're like, that works, and we'll spell knife with a K at the beginning. Why not? So, thank you for joining us today. We're primarily going to talk about a lot of your monochrome fine art nude work, because I think that's, in my opinion, your best work and maybe the most fascinating thing that you do, even though you do a lot of different types of photography, especially within portraiture. You wear a lot of different hats, but I think we're probably going to focus more on that, not just necessarily the nudes, but just your monochrome work in general. So, but if you want to talk about anything else, there's nothing wrong with that either. So I always start off every interview the exact same way, and you're no different. What got you into photography, and tell us about your journey, about how you got to where you are today.
Well, my journey for photography, I suppose, started primarily as a kid, because I grew up in the countryside, and I always had a camera in my hand. So I was doing sort of landscapes, wildlife, and as I got a bit older, I sort of progressed a bit more with different technologies. So yeah, obviously I started with film because I'm that old. But yeah, then when I sort of last 10 years, I sort of started doing a little bit of portrait work, and then it progressed from there into being more a lot more portrait work, a bit of commercial work, and certainly the fine art nude, which you was referring to as well earlier.
Yeah. So what draws you to the fine art nude? And for people who are listening, because we have a lot of different types of photographers who listen to this pod. We do mainly focus on portraiture on this pod because Brandon and I are both portrait photographers. But what got you into fine art nude photography? And for people who are listening, who maybe want to explore that, how do they even get into that genre? Because it feels like a bit of an icebreaker, could be a little awkward. Like, you want to take your clothes off and do some shots? Like, how does one get into fine art nude photography, and what got you into it?
As a photographer, I suppose I've always had an interest in that, because my background is I sort of grew up in a naturist environment, so I'm used to people being naked. That is normal for me. But then also, when I was younger, did a bit of life modeling, and now that I do portrait work, it seemed a good idea to take my photography down that line and use the artistic history from my past to promote body positivity. So that's the basis for my fine art nudes. Is I will basically photograph anyone, regardless of age, gender, size, ethnicity, and try and promote that body positive message that everyone can be a model, they're beautiful, and from that point of view, I hope that message comes across in my work more than a lot of people tend to sort of see it as nudes as a sexual thing, whereas art nude should not be sexual in any way, and I don't think any of my work ever comes across like that, which is I'm hopefully a good thing.
Looking at your work, I don't really see any sexualization at all. And that is something that you point out that I think is unique about your work, because I do stumble across fine art nude photographers who they have a type. And it's like, oh, yeah, I'm going to go with blonde women with very large chests and so on and so forth. And you're kind of like, yeah, I don't really think you're getting into this for the right reasons. Whereas you'll have people who are in their 70s, like married couples, and some of, I think, your most authentic and beautiful work that you've ever done is of that particular couple that I'm referring to. I don't remember their names. I just know that you've referred to them in the past. And I always thought that the work you've done with that couple is just gorgeous.
Yeah, I think I remember the couple you're talking about is Tim and Sally, and they're not actually a couple.
Well, a couple of models.
Together.
They photograph as a couple. My bad.
They photograph as a couple. That's right. Yeah, and yeah, I mean, Tim as a male model, he's just approaching sort of mid-60s, sort of mid-60s onwards. And Sally's a few years younger than that. But yeah, when I first worked with Tim, that was sort of during COVID. He'd not done nude modeling before, and he was looking for a photographer to do an art nude shoot with him. And I'm like, yeah, basically, I'll do this because it's someone different and it promotes body positive again, my message. So I did the shoot with him, and I remember putting the very first image up on my Instagram feed and saying to Kate, my partner, this is basically going to tumbleweed because no one's going to like it. And I have never had so many messages of positive support about any image ever. So that was a really nice thing. Actually even brought tears to my eyes. And there's a photographer not far from me. He spent his entire life being a press photographer and photo editor for newspapers. And he messaged me and he goes, it's really, really beautiful image. He said, very well done. And it's extremely difficult to do something well when you have nothing to copy. So coming from him, that was a really nice compliment.
Absolutely. And yeah, the image that I'm specifically referring to, because you shot a whole set with this I should say model couple, not like actually like a together couple. But the image specifically I'm referring to, and I will put links to these images in the description of this episode for listeners so they can follow along while they're listening, is the one where her head is kind of on his knee and he's like comforting. It looks like he's comforting her and rubbing his hand through her hair. Just a very authentic connection between two models and a really great capture by you.
Thank you. Yes. That one was literally one of the shots that I just love from that shoot. And as a bit of a context for that, that is up top of what is known as the Cheddar Gorge here in Somerset. So the views out across, which are not actually in the image, are quite spectacular.
I gotta make a quick commentary because I just read this article the other day. We sidetrack on this show, and Brandon will get a question in here in a second. But something I gotta talk about because I just remembered it is in the Cheddar Gorge and Caves area. They found recently a 9,000-year-old person in one of the caves, like frozen, and they did a DNA test on them. and they are a descendant of somebody who's a retired school teacher who lives like a kilometer away from the cave. I thought that was interesting.
No way.
Yeah. I'll send you an article too. I just had to. It has absolutely nothing to do with photography, but I was just like, I was doing some research on the area you live in, and like that article popped up, and I was like, holy crap, that's insane. But anyway, you were going to say something about at the Cheddar Gorge and Caves. I want to let you continue. Go ahead.
Yeah, the views there are spectacular, and I've used that location for a couple of times. You've seen some of the other images with a female model who's sat there in the rain as well. So I think it works well for that vulnerability element as well in the images that I very often take. So yeah.
Yeah, you said and you mentioned that the sexualization of the human body is not your end goal, but rather body positivity and the overall inclusiveness of all forms and just everyone in general. And it, I love your work, and I've been I'm looking at the same photo Kevin's looking at, and I'm curious to know. Because in nude photography, kind of like, sexuality is inherent in that sort of thing. I'd like to know, if not sexuality as an end goal, how do you come to play with these motifs with your naked subjects? And as I'm also looking at the photo of the man with sunglasses on, lying nude on a tree with a pint. So I'm curious, what sort of drives the themes here?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think the themes basically fit the environment and the people. So I remember listening to a previous episode which you recorded, and Brandon, I remember you saying when you did nude photography, is the best way is to pretend to be gay. If you're photographing male models, then that's not a good option to take. Yeah. But yeah, the one with the tree and the guy with the pint mag. There's also an image with him. He's got a book as well. Was just using people in nature and just showing how the human form can work with nature, be comfortable in nature, and we don't actually need clothes either to be in existence and not have any sexual meanings for them. So how do I actually come up with these? Yeah, it is just literally turn up on the site and see what works, because everyone you shoot has a different comfort level. And yeah, I mean, I think Kevin referred to when we used to talk on Clubhouse about the guy on the tree. He goes, he's the most comfortable person in the world. and I think he basically is. So that was a really good shoot as well. So yeah.
I couldn't help but notice, and I don't know if you did this on purpose, but the angle that you shot him lounging on that tree, it looks like the Guinness harp.
Yeah, I just sort of saw him sat there on that tree, and I just walked around, and I want an image where you can see him and the environment, but then you don't focus on genitals and stuff. So therefore, you've got to be careful on angles, and I think that's where I sort of probably differ, because a lot of people, Kevin picked up on it earlier, is they pick a type, usually young females, because that's an easy option to work with. Everyone likes that. It gets
a lot of clicks. I gotta say though, on this shot, I love the book he's reading, because he's got the top hat on, but he's reading a book that says How to Look Good Naked. I love your attention to detail there. Yeah,
I bought that book purposely for that shoot. Because over here in the UK, we had a television show presented by a guy called Gok Wan, and it was titled How to Look Good Naked, and that was the book it went with the show. And I just thought that would be a nice little play to work with, and see who actually picks up on that. You obviously did, and a few other people, and it's just nice to do little things like that to just sort of give people an interest in an image, make them stop, look beyond the initial, oh, they're naked.
You are listening to the F11 Photography Podcast.
When it is decided that someone is to be nude during a shoot, it should be kind of a checklist item, just like when you're doing a shoot where they're wearing clothes. It's just one of the many decisions that are made. And if you treat it as such, then you're not drawing unwanted attention to it necessarily if you execute it properly. And I definitely find that that's true with your work. So one of the shots that I want to talk about is probably, I would say, top 3 to 5 of my favorite shots you've taken, is the gentleman who is sitting on an abandoned building, and he's sitting in either a large window or door that's no longer there, and it's a 2-story, and you do a profile shot of him nude, contemplating life or whatever. And man, as an environmental portrait photographer, I gotta say, like, I hope you've made prints of this image, and I hope people have purchased them, because it's an absolute banger, as you guys say in the UK.
So that would be a guy called Mark. He approached me asking to do an art nude shoot, which is, to be fair, most of the people I've shot have approached me to do the shoots. And this is an environment, it's an abandoned milk factory about 2 hours from me. And I've used it quite a few times. And yes, he is sat there in a big doorway. And it's actually a 3-story building, but I just didn't put the top floor in on that image because I didn't think it added anything extra to the image. And then I'm on a roof of an adjacent building shooting across the driveway at that one. So I quite like that one, simply because he is, like you said, sat there contemplating life, and there is a certain vulnerability. He's there right on the edge, and we all sort of get those times in our life where we're like, what are we doing? What's our way forward? And I thought that was one of those images that stood out for me as well from that shoot. So yeah, I like that one as well. Thank you.
One theme I notice, and this is a theme that I do a lot in my photography as well, just the only difference being is that the models tend to have clothes on, is that you like to use juxtaposition a lot. And I'd imagine that living in, because in the United States we have we have old buildings, but we don't have old buildings the way you have old buildings in the UK. You have buildings that have lasted like centuries, plural. Like, you can go into a castle that's 600 years old or whatever. And so I've noticed that you take advantage of your surroundings, much like a farmer who makes a saison ale, just takes whatever's laying around his farm and like turns it into a saison beer. You do the same with your environmental portraits. You really do take advantage of what your area has to offer you. But what draws you to juxtaposition? Because you'll take a gorgeous, beautiful person nude and put them in like an abandoned prison, for instance, or you'll take them into like an old factory. And what draws you to that style of photography?
That's a really good question. I think for me, I find certainly art nudes in the studio boring. They're all the same. You're limited what you can do. Whereas if you can put someone in an environment, be that an old building or a prison, that automatically implies some sort of vulnerability. But yet again, landscapes, putting them in a landscape is our natural environment. To be nude is to be natural. So I'm trying to make that sort of, there's two connections. One is you either natural in a natural environment, or if you're in some sort of abandoned building or prison, you have that vulnerability which most people can associate being nude with, because most people are not used to going around naked. So if they're naked, it's always like this sort of, oh, I can't do this. People will see me. And so then when they see these images, they look at them and go, actually, this does work. It sort of hits a chord with them and pulls them in a bit more.
Yeah, you touched on your style of shooting, just getting into the thick of it when you're there, when you arrive on location with the model. And so I'm curious because some of your shots do look like they have a little more planning, a little more foresight, especially with the book, How to Look Good Naked. And I'm just curious, for those wondering, especially in the audience, like what is your process going into these shoots? Like, to what extent are you planning in terms of posture, props, the works?
Specific poses, no, I don't do, because as you'll probably notice, most, if not all, of my art nude is natural light, simply because I think that looks better than trying to sort of do all the strobes and stuff. So props and things, yes, I will sort of go through an idea, books, mugs, suitcases, hats, things like that. I would take those, and occasionally, if they work for an image, or I think they're going to work, we would try it. But specific shots, occasionally, if I know the location really, really well, I will have something in mind. But as a rule, I tend to sort of work with the people that I'm photographing and see their body shape, how comfortable they are, also what the weather and the lighting will give me at the same time. So I have to be sort of slightly dynamic on a shoot to get those images. And if you go there too rigid, you miss those beautiful shots if you go there with an open mind. Because going back to that shoot earlier, what Kevin was referring to with Tim and Sally, we had the location, but we had no shots in mind what we was going to do. And as a threesome, we turned up, we just walked around, and we all came up with ideas for shots, where we're going to shoot, how we're going to shoot it. So it's a team effort, that is, and that's how I tend to like to work, get everyone involved on that, rather than just my thoughts.
Yeah, and you know what? It's absolutely breathtaking, and it's similar to how I approach my shots, especially in environments where the backdrop, the scene, and the environment is so compelling. Sometimes I don't want to go in there with a plan because the backdrop is enough, and sometimes it's easier to adapt in the moment than to go in with a plan, and suddenly you're more rigid and what you create isn't necessarily the optimum of what you could have created. And so, saying that, I'd love to know, such as the Milk Factory, or what was Cheddar Valley. Do you do location scouting, or is this, obviously you've got a couple things, in back pocket, a couple locations in back pocket, but are you ever exploring new locations? Is this a Google Map thing, or is this just driving along the road on a new road and suddenly you see okay, there's a shot over there that we could explore?
Oh yeah, always. You see other people post images, whether it's people on Facebook have just posted a little snap of something or something on Instagram, and you're like, that's interesting. I might be able to use that. So you sort of Google Earth it, or if, like you said, you're out driving and you're driving past and you think, well, that's something that is interesting. I must bookmark that and come back. So yes, always looking for new locations. But some of the locations, I mean, like the Milk Factory, I knew of the place. I'd seen a YouTube video of an explore someone had done with it. So I went there the first time to shoot, never having visited myself, but I had a rough idea of what was there because of one of these Urbex explorers had done a hour-long video of it for me. So using resources like Google Earth, YouTube, Facebook, and that, you can always find plenty of new well, I say plenty, there are a bit scarce old buildings like that, but it's always nice to find new places, and hopefully there's plenty more to explore at some point.
Hey, this is Doss Miller, and you're listening to the F11 Photography Podcast.
Speaking of places you've used more than once, and maybe this was the same shoot, maybe this was different shoots, but I noticed, I don't know if this is the Milk Factory or somewhere else, but there's this shoot that you did. I believe one of the models you use commonly, her name is Shannon, and then another one is Helen. Helen Saunders. I'm looking at the picture right now. Okay. There's like this circular, very there's this very circular, very symmetrical look. I can even see some frames of what appears to be a frame out of a floor. So it looks like you're straddled over two beams, and you're shooting down on this circular whatever this is. And then there's like two arrows that kind of perfectly frame the model and turns them into an arrow. But anyway, I see that you've taken more than one model to this place. Now, is it because they wanted to go there because they saw you shoot somebody else there, or is it part of an ongoing project you wanted to try something different with a different model? Tell me a little bit more about how you created this shot, because you've done it twice. Once fully monochrome, and once with selective color using the color red for sort of a little sheet or whatever, and that was with Shannon. But go ahead and tell the story about this and tell us why you love this location so much.
Yeah, so this is a location. This one is an abandoned hotel. I knew it as a working hotel about 15 years ago when it closed, and it was basically the only abandoned building that I knew of at the time. So I used it a few times, as you say, 3 or 4 different models. So that shot that you're referring to they're laid on a round table, which is upside down. So the legs have all fallen off. So that's the tabletop. And yes, I'm then stood on the next floor up on the floor joist. Vandals had been in and ripped up all the floorboards. So I'm there straddled across this big opening. It's about 3 foot wide, holding my camera, looking down over them, hoping that I don't fall down to get that shot. So it's a really nice shot, unusual angle. So I like that one.
Do you so something we talked about in one of our episodes, being an environmental portrait photographer myself, and Brandon being an environmental portrait photographer as well. Do you ever find yourself like having a primary, a secondary, and like a tertiary goal, and then when you feel like you've met your 2 objectives, you might try something a little bit more experimental as far as trying a new lighting technique, or maybe trying a crazy pose or something like that, and then maybe you fail at it, but you put it in the back of your mind of, okay, well, since this was like a tertiary goal of this shoot, I'll take a different model here later because I didn't quite achieve it. But I have this idea now that I tried something here, and I'll come back to this location later with a different model and see if I can make it better. And since it was such an afterthought for that shoot, the model that you were shooting isn't going to be all bummed out that you didn't send them all your bad outtakes, right? But do you do that? Do you make those mental notes of, okay, it didn't work for this shoot, but I'm going to take a different model there next time and execute? Do you do stuff like that?
Oh, yes, you have to. I mean, because some models suit different parts of a location better than another. And you're there on the day and you see something and you just suggest it to a model, try this, try that. And you look at the images afterwards and you're sort of like, it didn't quite make the cut for whatever reason. Maybe you needed a slightly curvier model to go against this juxtaposition of the square edges of whatever it is they're stood against. So you go back with a different model. And sometimes that will work with a different model, sometimes it doesn't, and you just then realize there is no shot here. But then very often you'll go back, try it again, and you'll try something slightly different because you learn from that. So every time you go to a same location, you see different things with different people. And some things will work, some things won't. It's an individualistic thing. The lighting on the day will change. and you'll see something different, which may or may not work. But yeah, it's always a learning curve when you keep returning to a same location, and you see stuff. You think, I do need a different model to do this. There's one in the factory. There's a guy picture there of Mark in a big pipe. The first time I went to that factory, I saw the pipe. I saw the light in the pipe. But the model I had with me, I knew wouldn't work for that particular shot, so I didn't try it. But when I went back with Mark, I got him in that pipe, and the light shining through that pipe worked brilliantly for him. So, yeah, always have things in your mind, what will work for a return shoot.
Yeah, and it's always the testing of different things. And it's funny you say that, and I know what you're talking about. There's one place that I like to go shoot. It's not really an open field. It's more like a forest clearing. They're going to build something on it eventually, but it starts out in the winter, and in the winter everything dies on it, and it becomes this giant amalgamation of red soil and tree stumps and whatnot. And little estuaries get carved in there as the rain falls. And then during the spring, it becomes a little grassy. It's just bizarre grassy and red. And then over the summer, the grass is tall grass, and it's up to your knees, and it's a completely different environment. So I shoot there maybe once a year, and it's always a different experience with different models. And some models can hack it, some can, and it's always mental gymnastics trying to shoot that location, just because unless you location scout it, but that does take time out of the day. But I did want to move over to the gear question. Obviously, this isn't super important for making work. This isn't going to make or break a lot of photographers' work, and a lot of competent photographers, such as yourself, would be able to execute these shots probably with any camera system, given a good 30 seconds to learn it. But I'd like to know what you shoot on and how it works for you and why you do so.
Yeah, I don't think the gear is important for the most part. Occasionally I will shoot film, so harking back to the early days. But I shoot with a Canon R5 like Kevin does. So that's my main workhorse. I like it purely because of the autofocus, and it's quick. But I've recently bought a Fuji GFX medium format, and I actually did an art nude shoot with that a few weeks ago with a male model that I'd never worked with. And the difference between that and the R5 is huge. I like the images out of the GFX. They don't require a lot of work done to them, so that's something that I think I may use more for the art nudes going forward.
I think it was made for your art nudes, to be honest. Like monochrome, that pulling the dynamic range out of that cloudy southwestern UK sky, and it's just overcast, and just you want to get that kind of beautiful, just kind of high contrast look. I think the GFX was like made for your photography, but that's just me.
No, I remember when you bought yours, the very first shoot you done, you sent me some raw files from it, and I stuck them in Lightroom, and I was like, fuck me, these are brilliant. They don't need nothing doing to them. And it's like, yeah, I always wanted one, and I had to make up my mind what I went for. I don't need the GFX 100 like you've got, so I went for the 50S. 50 megapixels is big enough. The files are actually still twice the size of the R5.
For the record, Chris, I don't need the 100. I wanted the 100.
yeah.
I could get by just fine with the 50.
You're a gas, aren't you?
It was gas, 100%. And
yeah.
So when you edited your first file on there, did it kind of blow your mind to learn that black isn't really black, that there's like another layer of black that a GFX file has that your R5 didn't have?
Yes, certainly. The GFX file black is more like coal black, whereas the R5 black is just sort of like a black piece of paper. And it's like, oh, there's about another 50 shades of black in between.
Yes.
So, yeah.
Yes, it's that experience of editing a GFX file and you're just like, holy shit. Like, I didn't know I could do this.
Yeah. But the other brilliant thing is actually the GFX files don't really need editing. They come out of the camera and it's like, oh shit.
Yeah, well, that's why I made the investment in the first place. Like, I'm not a preset guy. Like, I don't like, but the reason I'm not a preset guy is because when I put a preset on my R5 file, it tends to not look great, and I have to go in and do a bunch of post production. And that's what that tool is good at, because oftentimes when I go shoot with the R5, it's for commercial work, and when I shoot commercial work, it's somebody else's vision and it's somebody else's visual aesthetic that I'm trying to create. So I need that starting point of, okay, I shoot in RAW, I'll go in, I'll tweak the colors based off their visual aesthetic, their brand needs or whatever. Whereas when I shoot on Fuji, both GFX and the XH2 is I shoot for myself. And so shooting for myself, I want to get everything as right at the camera as possible, because I know I already have like envisioned what I want this to turn out as. Like, I know where I'm going with it. Whereas when I'm shooting for somebody else, they're going to have all these opinions in post-production about, no, go back and do it this way or do that way. And so that's, to me, the appeal of shooting on Fuji, especially the GFX is, I mean, I can shoot on classic negative and I can shoot on like Eterna, like a lot. I just love both of those. Now, I will say, I'm not a huge fan of Acros. There's just something that's a little too flat about it, so I still use my own base edit preset that I made that is more of a noir feel, because that's just like how I'm shooting my black and white lately. But yeah, I mean, just shooting on that GFX is just like, I mean, it's not good for your hard drive because it takes up a lot of space, but it also does kind of encourage you to take less shots, not only because the autofocus on it is slow as molasses, but it's also just, you know, when you nail on it, it's like, yeah, I know I got the shot. It's a 100 megapixel file. I can see everything. I know I got this shot. I know everything's in focus. I know I nailed the colors. Don't you agree?
Yeah, I certainly agree. The R5 for me is my workhorse. It does the commercial work, all the stuff where I need to capture movement, because of that autofocus is like shit hot in tracking eyes and stuff. But I will agree with you, the colors on it do need more work. So yeah, I got a bunch of presets that get me sort of like 90% of the way there. Then I have to tweak every image to get them how they're supposed to look. Whereas the GFX, if you use one of the film sims, certainly, I mean, I've used Acros before with one of the filters, sort of maybe the red one or the green one sometimes. But then I have that created as my own preset to just push the blacks a little bit blacker and lift the highlights a bit more as well, to give it that bit more contrast. Because like you said, the Acros is a little bit flat. And I agree with that. But yeah, the autofocus on the GFX is absolutely shit.
Yes. Yes.
So
I actually
I'm treating it like a film camera.
Yeah, I shoot manual. I shoot manual focus in the studio with it because I'm faster than the autofocus is. And since you're shooting at f8, f11 in the studio most of the time anyway, like, you're gonna nail focus. Like, you don't have to worry about slightly over or under correcting your depth of field. It's gonna nail.
Exactly. And you grew up with film as well, so you're, like me, used to manual focus, and you're also used to that slower process of shooting film. So you treat the GFX like a film camera, basically.
Yeah. Have you purchased any GF lenses, or are you still adapting Canon lenses to it?
I'm still using the EF lenses at the moment. So my Sigma Art 50 and 85 work brilliantly on it. Even the autofocus. And then the Canon EF135 f2L, that looks really good on it as well. The autofocus on that one's slightly slower if I use it in autofocus mode. But at the moment, I'm looking at some dedicated GFX lenses, but I'm not sure which focus length I like at the moment.
I would personally, like, just because it's on rebate, I would pull the trigger on that quote unquote kit lens, because, you know, if you stop down to f8 and, you know, just throw it into like auto ISO, even if that GFX in that, you know, dark UK environment and monochrome, if it shoots at like, you know, whatever, 2400 ISO or something like that, 2400 ISO on that camera looks like 640 on a R5 or something. Like it doesn't look the same. And the quote unquote noise more emulates grain structure of film. Like if you zoom in on the files, it's more circular and less colorful than a lot of noise that you see on other cameras. But just something to keep in mind. Don't let the darker aperture, especially with you being an environmental portrait photographer, wanting to get everything sharp. You know, you shoot at a shallow depth of field sometimes, but I think if you got like that kit lens, then you got something like down the road, the 110 or the 80, you'd be fine. I mean, you could get by with just those two lenses for the most part.
Yeah, I've noticed that. I'm not afraid of noise in high ISOs. I mean, even on my R5, I'll push that to 10,000 ISO. And the little bit of noise that you get on it is only noticeable if you pixel peep, normal work, no one notices it. And certainly for mono, you treat it just like it's a bit of film grain. So I think people who sort of, certainly on the forums online, you sort of say, oh, but you got noise at 6,000 ISO or whatever. They're talking bollocks because no one actually really gives a shit. But yeah, I've noticed that with the GFX, the noise levels are not comparable. And yeah, the depth of field on it as well. Just open up the lens and just shoot and just go for it.
Hi, I'm Jordan Groby, and you're listening to the F11 Photography Podcast.
I'm going to ask another gear question because I'm in the gear kind of mood right now. We've talked about your cameras, we've talked about your systems, and it sounds like in this love triangle that we have here, I'm going to have to switch cameras because you guys have identical cameras, and I'm running with a Nikon Z6. So it's plus I think if you're a Nikon shooter, you're just the black sheep in any case. But that all being said, I'd like to ask, if you had to choose a single lens to carry out your work for the next year, just one lens, either you know the Sony or the Canon, which would you choose?
Fuji.
Oh yeah, sorry, I thought EF was Sony for a second. My bad. But yeah, which lens, which focal length and aperture would you choose?
I suppose most of the work I do with the Canon is always with the Sigma R85 1.4. I just love that focal length, so I guess that would be my lens of choice, and I adapt that one onto the Fuji GFX. So on the GFX, that becomes like a 63 1.1. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so shooting at that shallow depth of field with that shit autofocus is not a good idea. But yeah, I think the 85 is my favorite focal length.
Wow, yeah, and that's a calorie burner too. That's let's walk up to the model, put them in their, help them find the place that they're going to be for their posture, and then just be like, all right, I'm going to take a quick jog over here, and if you need me, I'll just jog right back over and repeat that process for the next couple hours or so. So that's brilliant.
Yeah, mind you, I have shot at the models with the 70 to 200 2.8, and I have shot that at 2.8 quite often as well. Jeez. As an environmental portrait, simply because I love the compression.
Oh yeah, that's right. You helped me out with my review of that lens because I borrowed the lens from my sponsor, the 70 to 200 2.8, the RF, and I wanted to do the comparison to the Tamron. And I'd already returned my Canon, and I was like, well, I don't know if they're going to let me borrow both lenses at once. And then I realized that you used to own the Tamron, so you just gave me two files to review, which is great. But you took that really badass looking guy, that picture of that guy who kind of looks like, what's his name, Tom Hardy from the Batman movies and everything, Bane. really cool shot. But I mean, your 70 to 200 work is awesome, and that shot in particular stood out to me. But one thing I have noticed, and you may start picking up on this, I know you're really new to your GFX, is that my favorite focal length changes depending on the format I shoot in. So when I shoot on my R5, if I'm doing portraiture, I favor that 85 look. I love that 85 look, but it goes to whatever it is, 67 millimeters or 67 millimeter, like, aspect, so to speak, when you put it on a medium format. And I actually find that when I shoot medium format, I tend to favor a normal field of view more. The 50 millimeter equivalent, which if you shoot on Fuji GFX is 63 millimeters. And I've just noticed that that's something that's changing depending on the camera I shoot on. But, I don't know if you noticed it yet, but just pointing that out, you may find yourself favoring different focal lengths based off of whatever camera you're shooting on.
Yeah, I think I am actually beginning to sort of favor slightly shorter focal lengths for the GFX. I don't know why, whether it's simply because you can get away with doing that short focal length and still have that beautiful shallow depth of field if you need it, or whether it's that larger sensor just creates that different look. Maybe it's the aspect ratio. I don't know, but I have noticed I am sort of preferring a slightly shorter focal length on that camera.
Well, as we discussed, when you do shoot medium format, you get that shallower depth of field. But another thing to keep in mind about medium format is, we measure everything in f-stops at the lens, but we measure things in t-stops at the sensor. Or if you're shooting in film, you measure it at the emulsion. And because the sensor is so much larger, it's like, whatever it is, 60 something % larger than a full frame, you actually gather more t-stops at the sensor. And I think that's one of the reasons why noise isn't as apparent. And it's also why, you shouldn't freak out when you're like, well, that lens only goes to f4 for maximum aperture. It's like, well, on medium format, that's not that big of a deal. Not only in terms of depth of field, but in terms of light transmission and light gathering abilities, because you are gathering more at that enormously large sensor. Now, we'll give you one final warning before we change the subject and move away from gear, which is that GFX sensor loves dust. So if you haven't already purchased a kit for it to clean the sensor, get it. And there are very, very, very specific instructions that you need to do to clean the sensor. I'll link you up to the video if you haven't already seen it, and we'll do it offline. But don't destroy your very expensive sensor. That's all I'm going to say.
Yeah, I do have the blower and the brush for it already, because that's one thing I hate with Fuji. I don't know if Nikon do it, but Canon actually do have a nice little shutter. As soon as you take the lens off, the sensor's protected. Fuji don't. And that bloody great sensor on the GFX is literally going to be a dust magnet, like you said.
Question.
Obviously, always turn the camera off before you change the lens so it doesn't attract quite so much dust.
Have you ever cleaned your sensor on your R5?
No, never.
Exactly. I've never. Oh, okay. I've had my R5 for 2 years, and finally, during a studio session last week, I finally got a piece of dust in there, and I just blew it off with a blower real quick. Only time I've ever had to service my sensor ever in the history of owning that camera. So yeah, I would love to see other manufacturers get on board with that. And we had that conversation with Vanessa Joy about Canon, but with other manufacturers, she was like, wait, other manufacturers don't do that too? I was like, no, it seems so obvious. So I'm wondering, Chris, if Canon may have a patent on that, which is why nobody else has attempted to do it. I thought Nikon or Sony had it in some of their cameras, but they do it kind of differently than Canon. But I'm assuming because Canon is actually one of the most patented companies in the world. Like they have the most patents out there over any company. I mean, they have just stupid lens ideas that'll never see the light of day, but they own the patent just in case they decide to unearth it and pull the trigger on it. So I want to shift gears real quick though. I want to talk a little bit about, to me, your most powerful work tends to be in monochrome. And by the way, you also have shots that you've taken of people with clothing on in monochrome, to me, that are powerful. So like one kind of, I don't know if I'd necessarily call it a series, but it's something that you seem to do, something you seem to play on. So like the gentleman with the top hat and the round glasses and the 3-piece suit, the convict, because I can see that he's dressed old-fashioned like. But it seems that you tends to like favor more old time looking stuff when you do shoot in monochrome. And I guess too, my question is, what is it about monochrome that attracts you to it so much? Besides the fact that sometimes you screw up, you can't get your white balance figured out, and you just throw it into mono.
Yeah, funny you pick that up on, but no, if I shoot an image that you see in mono, it's always been intended to be mono. It's not like one where I've just gone, shit, the white balance is all over the place, or killed the highlights. No, the images that are shot in mono are intended to be mono pretty much. So for me, the mono images always have this timeless feel. So I guess that's probably why they look slightly old, because black and white was always the initial format for photography from the early beginnings, and colors obviously a modern incarnation of photography. So if the monos looked too modern, then they lose that timeless feel for me.
That makes sense. Speaking of mono, so I know I hear the Brits complain that it's always raining, that the weather's always bad, and so on and so forth, and that it's shit. But honestly, I am jealous of the weather that you all get there in the UK, because I love that diffused cloudy day look. And we're going here in Texas on like our 120th straight day of like no sustained rain. So I just got to say, I totally understand that it's probably a celebration when the sun comes out there, but I am just letting you know that we are quite jealous of your weather as photographers, as people who love diffused light.
Yeah, I love the diffused light. It's nature's softbox. No harsh shadows. Yet people do complain over here about the weather. It's like, well, it's raining or it's too sunny. And yes, I've got shots. One of my Instagram ones that went up yesterday was a lady in an orange dress. That was shot full sun behind, just off to the right of the model, or my right side. And there was no way I could get that shot and put her in some sort of natural shade. So I actually had to just work with the harsh light. And I think that image came out really, really well. But again, when we got rain, you just work with the rain. Most cameras, if you've got a pro level camera, are weather sealed. So like my Canon R5, I have no problems taking that out in a rain, using it. So I did a shoot, what was it, just over a year ago now, with a model. She's a 5 times Paralympic gold medalist, and we did an art nude shoot up top Richetta Gorge there, and it is pouring down with rain. But the rain adds atmosphere to that image. It's a different dynamic than the image we was talking about at the beginning of the show with the couple, because that was taken on one of those sort of slightly overcast days. So it's just learning to work and embrace our weather. So I do actually feel your pain of actually having all that sunshine, although when we don't need to actually do anything, it would be nice to have some sunshine so we could actually just sit on the garden with a few beers or something.
we just need to average out each other's weather. You can get more golden hour, and we can get more diffused light. But I do want to talk about that shot in the rain with that model. Is the nude shot. She's sitting there with her hand in her hair, and she's like crossing her right leg over her left leg. She's kind of facing away from the camera. It's a shot kind of over the shoulder, and the rain is coming down. Definitely putting this in my top 3 favorite Chris Woodman shots. What's the story behind that?
So this is a model. Well, she wasn't actually much of a model when she contacted me. So this is Rihanna. She's like I said just earlier, she's a 5 times Paralympic gold medalist, and she'd never done an art nude shoot. So she messaged me after seeing a lot of my work and said, could we do a shoot? And I said, yes. How about this as a location? Was not expecting it to rain. The day before, we did the shoot. I looked at the forecast and I thought, okay, are we actually going to go ahead with this? Because the forecast really is not looking great, and this is one hell of an exposed location. But she said, no, it's absolutely fine. So she drove nearly 3 hours to get to do this shoot with me, and fair play to her. I can see why she is a gold medalist, because her determination to just get somewhere and follow something through is obviously how she became a Paralympic gold medalist. But yeah, this shot, I just sort of got her to sit down and look at the views, and there was something about the angle that I picked for taking that shot. It's coming up from behind her, sort of just a slightly off side profile shot, and the rain reflecting in the light, I just thought added real drama and atmosphere to this shot, which if I'd actually shot this on a bright sunny day would not have the same feelings and emotions with it. So for me, the weather there played a huge part in making that shoot work, despite the difficulties the rain actually posed.
My guess is about 1/125th of a second. I'm just looking at the rain, so I might have been way off. It's not frozen. She's frozen, but the rain's not frozen. So I'm assuming it's somewhere in that 1/125th. But hey, just a note, real quick. You talked about your Canon and taking your Canon out into the rain. I've taken my R5 out into the rain so many times, but the one thing I will absolutely advise you against doing it, despite the fact that they say it's weather sealed, be careful taking your Fuji out in the rain. I took my XH2 out in the rain with the Tamron.
Oh, I saw that, yeah.
Yes, turned into a paperweight. I took it out on one shoot in rain, roughly about what you have in this picture that you took of this beautiful model. And I had to send my camera in, and I didn't have it for a month. So it was covered under warranty. I just played dumb. I was like, yeah, it just stopped working. And they had to replace the motherboard, which is like a $1,200 repair normally. So just giving you a heads up on that with your GFX. I know you like to shoot, you were talking about using it for your fine art nudes, and that you shoot environmental portraits and all that. Just maybe get one of those little covers for it. But on the subject of nudity, your Instagram, I want you to tell me how many times your Instagram has been banned or temporarily shut down because of nudity. And I want your unfiltered thoughts on censorship and how it pertains to nudity. Go ahead.
Well, I've actually been lucky. Instagram has not actually stopped me from using my account. I think I've just been lucky in not posting nude after nude after nude. So when they pick one up, they used to flag it up, and they just take it away and just say, if you keep doing this, we will suspend your account. So yeah, the flag was always there on my account, so I just post some of my fashion work just till the flag disappeared, or I thought it was safe. So Instagram, they really fucking pissed me off with the nudity, because they always pick on art nudes, but you see the trashy porn stuff and they don't do nothing about that. So I'm actually beginning to play Instagram at their own game by having a secondary account to post my art nudes from, and invite my main account as the collaborator. So the secondary account will get hit, if it ever does get hit again, with the warnings, whereas my main account then will be unaffected, because I've noticed Instagram now don't seem to take images down. They just flag them and just say, we cannot promote your work to non-followers, which is absolute bullshit. Yeah, it's just working with their rules. I don't understand Meta's policy. I can appeal decisions for images they take down, and they just go, no, sorry, it doesn't comply. And I'm like, what the fuck? There's absolutely nothing here. It's a side profile of a bloke sat in a piece of grass on a beach. And that image is actually on my Instagram feed now, which I took last summer. Yeah, it's flagged. They just said we can't promote it. And I don't understand why, because you see nothing.
You know, if you put that man in a cheetah print swimsuit, gave him a mojito, and had him pose in front of a Ferrari, you would be fine. It wouldn't have been a single issue.
Unfortunately, Chris probably has a big old problem with that though, because it's trashy as fuck. But that's still gotta be frustrating, or as you all say, frustrating, because you guys put emphasis on different different vowels.
Yeah, it's very frustrating for us. Yeah.
That's awesome, man. Well, we could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, but we're probably going to have to wrap this up. But I want you to talk about what do you have going on right now, and is there anything that you want to plug on this show?
So I got a couple of projects that we're going to do. One of them is a commercial fashion shoot with a model that I work with called Ed. So we've done quite a few branded shoots for our fashion work, which is nice, and we get that sort of published, and that's quite good. I've just organised a shoot today with a lady who does fire breathing. So that's one that I'm going to shoot in a couple of weeks' time, with luck. But yeah, it's always nice if people sort of check out my website, chriswoodmanphotography.com, and then all my other links are there. Maybe just give me a follow on Instagram. The loves, comments are always appreciated, and hopefully one day we can have a nice big following, sort of like Spencer Tunick with my art nudes, because he can post art nudes and Instagram leaves him alone. So I'm hoping one day, if I had a following as big as his, Instagram would just go, shit, we best not mess with Chris Woodman. But I don't think that will happen, but we can always hope.
Maybe one day. I do have one final question before we leave. I kind of made a 2 or 3 part question, and you answered a couple parts, and then I probably took you off on a tangent, because that's what I do. If somebody is listening to this pod and they are like, hey, I want to get into fine art nude photography. I'm not a creepy person. I just want to document the human form. Give some advice to that person as to how they can go about doing it in a very professional way, and ways that resources they could utilize to get into that sort of photography. I
think first thing is find someone they can work with who's comfortable taking their clothes off in front of them. Most likely it's not going to be a friend, but you never know. Maybe approach models who work for life drawing classes or something like that, because they're used to being naked in front of an audience. And then something else that I always do for my art nude shoots is literally every shoot, all the images I take are shown to the model, whether that's at the back of the camera or I put them up online in a gallery that they can look through. And I always say to them, if there's an image here that you do not like and you wish me to delete so it's never seen ever again, give the model that option. I've never had a model actually ask me to delete an image, but it just gives that confidence to the person that you're photographing that you respect them. And I think that's probably the biggest key, is the respect for the person that you're photographing, because without them, you have nothing.
The reason they didn't delete it, or they didn't ask you to delete it, is because you're a professional. ChrisWoodmanPhotography.com is where you can find his work. You can also find him on Instagram at Instagram.com/ChrisWoodman_photography. And of course, we'll leave a link in the description below of this podcast. My best to you and your family, and it's good talking to you, Chris, and let's stay in touch.
Yeah, will do. You take care. Thank you very much for having me on.
Talk to you later.
Take care. Cheers.
Ladies and gentlemen, Chris Woodman. That does it for today's episode. You can find us at f11pod.com. You can, of course, use the extension, the handle of F11 as well, F11pod, on Instagram and Twitter, and we're not on Threads, sorry. But Thank each and every one of you for listening to today's episode. Chris was an awesome guest. It's really great to have people, especially portrait photographers, who do stuff that's far different from what Brandon and I do, and Chris is definitely that guy. So check out his work in the description below. And until next time, kids, chase light and not algorithms.
Thank you for listening to today's episode.
For more information about this podcast, go to www.f11pod.com.